The Soviet Union, the world's largest and most powerful communist state, collapsed in December 1991. In this video, we'll examine how and why it happened. The Soviet Union was the world's largest country, spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. It was also the most powerful communist state. However, by the late 1980s, the Soviet economy was stagnant. While under Brezhnev, the Soviet economy had grown significantly. By the late 1980s, it was clear that the Soviet economy could no longer keep up with the West. By 1989, the Soviet Union was spending over $30 billion annually on its military, more than double what the United States was spending. Furthermore, the Soviet economy was plagued with shortages of basic goods. While the Soviet government claimed that there was no shortage of anything, the reality was quite different. According to one American who visited Moscow in 1989, there were no shortages, but the stores were pretty bare. Shelves were empty, and the few items that were available were of poor quality. In addition to economic problems, the Soviet Union was also dealing with a growing number of ethnic nationalists who wanted independence from the Soviet Union. The largest of these groups were the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. These groups had been calling for independence since the 1970s. However, the Soviet government had always crushed these movements. But by the late 1980s, the Soviet government was becoming more tolerant of these movements. This was due to a number of factors. One was the economic problems that the Soviet Union was facing. The Soviet government was becoming less able to control its population. Another factor was the changing political winds in Eastern Europe. In 1989, the governments of East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia began to fall like dominoes. This inspired the Baltic people to renew their calls for independence. In August 1991, a group of communist hardliners tried to take control of the Soviet government and put Gorbachev in his place. They failed, however, and this only accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet Union was officially dissolved on December 26, 1991. The Soviet Union broke up into 15 independent states. These were Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, East Germany, West Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Slovakia. Why did the Soviet Union collapse? There are many who argue that it was the economic problems that brought down the Soviet Union. Others argue that it was the ethnic nationalist movements that caused the Soviet Union to break up. Still others argue that it was the result of Gorbachev's reforms. Whatever the cause, the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the most significant events of the 20th century. It brought an end to the Cold War and ushered in a new era of globalization. If you want to learn more about the Soviet Union, check out my other videos on the Russian Revolution, the rise of Stalin, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Thanks for watching.